Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Josh Hennig filling in for Mike Gill here on 97.3 ESPN as we are counting down the days to training camp. Although there are a couple of teams that are actually got people in there right now. It's the Raiders and the Bills have their rookies reporting today because they're in the Hall of Fame game. So football is already in the air, and we got Geoff Mosher back for another Monday edition of Football at 4 here on 97.3 ESPN. Geoff, I have good news for you. I have zero interest in talking about the Madden ratings.
Thank you. That would be a really boring 20-some-odd minute section segment with you and me if that were the case.
Honestly, when I've gotten 3 alerts today about the Madden ratings, and I've just done the left swipe on all of them. I'm just like, I'm out. I have zero interest.
Nice. I love that 2022 jargon. I just did the left swipe on it. That's all. That's, can you imagine trying to explain that to somebody in 1988? Oh, I didn't like what somebody said, so I just did the old left swipe on it.
1988? How about 2008?
How about that? How about 2018 even? So, yeah.
Couple things before we get to the great series that you guys have been doing with Greg Cossell over on the Inside the Birds podcast on the YouTube channel. You guys have talked about Dallas and Washington and kind of like the state of those teams going in. But a little news did come down today. The Eagles have released Craig James. I saw Andrew DeCecco from InsideTheBirds.com tweet that out. So I just want to get your thoughts on how relevant is this, how not relevant is the Eagles saying, we don't need an extra cornerback for training camp.
Well, I mean, sure, you'd like to have as many players at the position. And he is a guy who's had experience for them. He's been through some injuries. But, I mean, you've got between your 2 starters, right, Bradbury and Slay, and you've got your nickel corner and Maddox. You still have a lot of names there between Tay Gowan and Zach McPherson and Jimmy Moreland. That's 3 right there. And Mac McCain is 4, and Kerry Vincent is 5. I mean, it's great to have a lot of, and plus the kids they brought in from undrafted free agents. There was Josh Jobe. There was, I can't think, Mario Goodrich. So this to me is the Eagles just, looking at their overall set of corners and wanting to get their young guys that they brought in more looks. I mean, you could always bring back Craig James unless he gets, Craig Davis, I'm sorry, unless he gets, claimed by somebody. But it's, to me that's not a, I know that the narrative is out there is that they're making room for Jesse Bates. I sort of chuckle at that one.
Well, my first thought was, and, correct me if I'm wrong, but Craig James is more like a holdover from the Schwartz defense error. So it's kind of like, it's almost like the Eagles are like, all right, we've seen enough for Craig James. We want to see the other young guys, as you mentioned, come in here and get more work because we already know what Craig James offers.
Right. And of all those names I mentioned, I forgot the other slot corner that they had from last year that they got from Jacksonville in a trade whose name is suddenly leaving me. Oh, come on. The corner that they got from Jacksonville. Josiah. Yeah, Josiah Scott, is it?
Yes, Josiah Scott.
Yeah.
Michigan State.
Right, correct. So they certainly have enough corners for a first team, a second team, and a third team without Craig, and a fourth team even. So I think they'll be okay there. Yeah.
Well, they're definitely going to need him because we know in the preseason almost nobody plays anymore. So,
correct.
I think it's fair to say you're going to be seeing Josh Jobe on the field good about it those 3 preseason games. So.
Oh, no doubt about it. Like I mean, it's fun to say you need a lot of players at certain positions because starters don't play, but the backups play extended. That 3rd preseason game, some of those backups will play quite a while. So it's not like you need 11 bodies at the position. You just need a couple of those backup bodies, and you want to get more, again, fewer preseason games. So now when you do have backups in who you're considering to make your 53 and you want to see them on special teams, you play them a little bit longer than normal.
All right, Geoff, let's jump into what you, Adam, and Greg Cossell have been talking about on Inside the Birds. Greg Cossell doing an amazing job breaking down basically like the state of the other teams in the NFC East. And I want to start with the first one you guys did on Thursday, which was Dallas, because I thought one of the things you guys brought up on the pod that has been a real emphasis for me has been this isn't the Cowboys team we've seen the last few years. This offense has less weapons. Not saying they're not dangerous, because CeeDee Lamb and Tony Pollard and Zeke Elliott and Dalton Schultz, they're not chump change. But with Gallup coming off of that injury and them not, shall I call it, really replacing Amari Cooper, what is a fair expectation of the Cowboys offense now?
It's a good question. I see both sides to the Amari Cooper argument. I feel like he was a disappointment for them, if considering what they paid him, what they gave up to originally get him from the Raiders, and what he gave them overall in his Cowboys career. However, I'm a big fan. Like, when he is a difference maker. Now, he obviously, you have to live with some of the, coming off the field at certain times and the sort of disappearing act at certain times. But they don't have a wide receiver, a perimeter outside wide receiver that can do what he does. CeeDee Lamb's a really good player. I think he's a long striding slot receiver who has a really nice turn and run after catch ability, which makes him a very good interior receiver. And maybe he could play the outside. I wouldn't put it against him. I just don't know if he's as explosive of a receiver as Amari Cooper. So I don't really, like getting rid of kind of guys who are blue chip, but they decided that they would rather go ahead with Michael Gallup, a natural X who's coming off the injury, and then be able to have the money to re-sign Dalton Schultz, who I like. Greg Cossell made a great point. He's perfect for their system. He's not a guy that's usually their number one target, but in the right mismatch, if you're playing the right defense, he's going to get open. He certainly did against the Eagles last year. I mean, he crushed the Eagles last year, but that was really not him beating any one particular man, right? It was more about his void in the zone and him capitalizing on that space, making the catch. He is a tough player. He can fight for your extra yards, and he does that well. So they're a different kind of offense. I don't know if they're as explosive, but they are a little bit more, probably more balanced as long as Gallup comes back. And we'll have to see between Jalen Tolbert, who they drafted from South Alabama in the third round, and Simi Fehoko, who they liked last year but just couldn't get on the field because of what they had at the position. If one of those guys can kind of step up, and Noah Brown, of course, and be that guy, especially if Gallup isn't ready to start the year. But they, to me, they will probably be more balanced, and they will probably try to get back to running the ball and throw into the running backs and tight ends a little bit more.
Now, with that being said, if they're going to be running the ball more, as you said, Greg Cossell brought up the point that, this isn't the same Zeke that he used to be, and I think, even someone like myself who's not breaking down tape 24/7 like Greg Cossell is, can see, hey, Zeke, he just doesn't have the same breaking of a tackle, burst into the hole that he used to. So if the Cowboys are going to be leaning on the run game, is that really the best option for them?
I was a little surprised that they didn't try to upgrade a little bit more at that position, either in the draft or free agency, given that Zeke has been through some injuries and that Tony Pollard is a really impactful running back for them who does a little bit more versatile things than Zeke. I mean, he catches the ball well. He has a much better second gear now than Ezekiel Elliott has, but he's also, as I think Greg Cossell sort of said, he's sort of like an Alvin Kamara type back, in that you're not going to give him the ball 30 times, 30 carries, but you can throw it, you can run it with him, he can give you explosive yardage and he can be a difference maker, but he's not a high volume guy. So they have what I think is a good tandem with Zeke and Tony, but if one of those were to get hurt, it kind of makes you wonder, where do they turn for their ability to move the chains by the ground, which is so essential to what their offense is. So they're a little thin there, and that should be a concern. However, Josh, you know this better than anyone, right? Like, sometimes the fan viewpoint of an athlete is, if you're not what you used to be, you stink. Like, James Harden is not what he was in Houston. And it got to a point where people thought he stunk. He stinks. He's terrible. He's not terrible. He's a different kind of player now,
right?
But he's certainly not terrible. And I would say Ezekiel Elliott, I think most people would be surprised if I told them that he was over 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns last year combined, because I think people have this kind of perception that he now stinks. He does not stink. He's going to get you the 4 yards per carry. He's still a fighter of a running back. Like, he's hard to tackle when he gets going downhill, but he does not have the explosive element, that second level gear that he had. I mean, he was never really truly a breakaway Barry Sanders like, but he used to have a little bit of a better of a second gear that he no longer has. But he's still a good running back, and every time he plays the Eagles, he seems to be pretty productive. So he's still a guy that you got to have kind of circled if he's going to get the ball.
Football Forward, Geoff Mosher, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast at Geoff Mosher NFL on Twitter. The latest edition of the Inside the Birds podcast dropped this morning. We'll get to Washington in just a couple minutes, but I want to stick with the offense a little bit for Dallas because you mentioned about how Zeke has hurt the Eagles in the past. But my question for you, Geoff, is how much of that was Zeke and how much of that was that offensive line that's taken some hits in the last couple of years?
Well, I don't think you can divorce the two, but I will say I think you probably remember a couple of years ago against the Packers, Zeke busted out into the second level, and Chandon Sullivan tried to put his head down to tackle Zeke at the ankles, and Zeke hurdled him like an Olympic hurdler there and went on. And so Zeke was special now. I know he's a Cowboy, and I know I don't like to talk nicely about Cowboys in this area, but first 3-4 years of his career, yeah, Zeke was helped out by that offensive line, but he helped the offense also by making the most out of what he was given. I say that about Miles Sanders. Sure, it's great for Miles to play behind an offensive line, and he averages 5.5 yards per carry, but let's not act like Miles Sanders has not had some really explosive breakaway runs where he has just outran competition at times.
Do you think that the Cowboys offense is going to be good enough for them to do what they want to do this year?
I think it's going to be different. I think it's going to be more methodical. I think your question will be answered by Dak Prescott has gotten incrementally better every single year as a quarterback to now where you have that conversation of top 10 quarterback. Is he going to continue? Is he going to get into the top 5 just on his own work and improvement alone? Or have we seen last year what Dak Prescott is? And which is not bad, by the way. If that's the best that you're going to get, you have a chance to win.
Right.
But without that explosive element, you're going to need the running game. Because I do think that Dak is not the guy you want throwing 45 times a game. So we'll see. And then I would add on top of that, I think Kellen Moore. Is there Kellen Moore? Yeah.
Yeah.
Really, really good offensive coordinator. And it'll be up to him to kind of take this new look offense that he's got and guys like Jalen Tolbert, and we'll see what happens with James Washington and the offensive. If the offensive line stays healthy, I think that there'll be a really good offense. Maybe not as explosive as they were at times last year, but definitely being able to score 24 to 26 points a game.
Kellen Moore also continuing to audition for his next head coaching job because we know, when everybody, when guys like we talk about Jonathan Gannon got all those interviews last year. Kellen Moore's had 2 years worth of interviews at this point. So, at some point, someone's going to hire him. So he wants that offense to keep playing well.
Right. And the Cowboys are a strange team in that I don't think anybody is very impressed by the head coach, but I think the two coordinators, him and Dan Quinn and Kellen Moore, are the catalyst to their success last year and going forward. You
mentioned Dan Quinn. Let's get the defense real quick. No Randy Gregory. He's gone.
Right.
But the Cowboys did make some interesting additions this offseason to at least shore up what Dan Quinn likes to do. And I thought one of the things that Greg Cossell brought up is, hey, Dan Quinn wants to run a system. It's not literally the Seahawks defense, though. So,
right.
The additions they added may be more important to Dan Quinn than it may be maybe on, paper per se.
Right. I mean, Dan, when he brought the sort of the cover 1, cover 3 zone system to Atlanta, then he comes to Dallas and he plays a lot more man. So he adapted. He played more man defense than he was known for, and a lot of man defense last year because he just felt like he had the personnel to be able to do that, and that's great. I mean, obviously it paid off for Trevon Diggs. He became a playmaker. It paid off because you have a very good front 4 rush to be able to, help your corners out and your safeties out, and that front 4 rush was spearheaded by Micah Parsons. And so remember, DeMarcus Lawrence was out for most of last year. He's still a really good pass rusher, contrary to what some people will say. He is still a very good pass rusher. So when you have Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence, and yes, they lost Randy Gregory, they draft Sam Williams in the second round, a guy who had, late first, early second round talent. But some people felt he would not go there because of off-field stuff. Well, it's the Cowboys, right? So they took him in the second round. and they expect him to get on the field and make a difference. And just knowing the Cowboys like we do when we say this about the Eagles, if there's a pass rusher who's going to become available, whether it's Robert Quinn or somebody at the deadline, they'll make a move to try to pick him up. But I still think between those three guys, and of course they signed Dante Fowler, who's never really lived up to what he's supposed to be, but now he's your fourth pass rusher, so that's pretty good too. If you happen to get anything out of Tristan Hill, who they drafted a couple years in the second round, it's been a little bit disappointing. But I like their tackles. Gallimore and Osa Odigizua are good players. So their front seven, to me, as long as Micah Parsons is in there, man, they're going to be pretty tough. Parsons and Lawrence, if they stay healthy, and if there's that top two pass rushers and a four-man rush, Dallas is going to be able to move some quarterbacks off the spot.
I know we spent a lot of time on Dallas, so I don't want to burn the candle too hard on Washington, because we always can talk more about it on Wednesday's Football at 4 with you, Geoff Mosher. Inside the Birds podcast dropped this morning. Go listen to the full breadth of what Greg Cossell said about Washington. But I think two of the things I want to take away from specifically, you guys said multiple times on the pod that dropped this morning that, hey, if Washington is healthy, hey, if this guy is healthy, hey, if Curtis Samuel is healthy, and it seems like Washington is literally banking on, hey, if we're healthy, we're really good. But if we're not healthy, well.
Right. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, probably too much time. But I look at Washington's roster, which we can get into again when I'm on Wednesday, and I say to myself, I think they can make a pretty strong argument, just pound for pound, talent for talent, as having one of maybe the best 53 in the division. I'm not saying they have it. I'm just saying they can make a strong argument. They have a ton of blue chip talent at some pretty good positions, starting with the defensive line. And as we've seen here in Philly, when you have blue chip talent on the D line and you can go 5-6 deep, you're going to be pretty good. Now, unfortunately, they don't have it on the offensive line, and that's a big, not all 53s are equal. If you have the best 53 overall, but your top 5 players are like 2 safeties and a running back, and where it's dependent on other players, that's not the same as if you have the best quarterback, the best pass rusher, and then of course coaching comes into it. But you look up and down Washington's roster, 4 number 1 picks on the front line. You start with that. McLaurin's good. I think Jahan Dotson's going to be good. I think, as Greg brought up, Carson Wentz in the Scott Turner offense is probably a better fit than a West Coast offense, because he's not a short timing guy. He's a great RPO guy and a great downfield thrower. And so there's an opportunity for Carson to maybe have a little bit more comfort in Washington's offense and those weapons that we talked about. So, their interior offensive line stinks, and that might do them in, and why they might not be able to protect Carson and be that good. But from a talent standpoint, they have very good players.
When you look at the talent that they have, you mentioned, you even said on the pod, Geoff, that, hey, you could argue that Wentz has better talent in Washington around him than he did in Indiana last year. So
sure, just look at the receivers, right? Yeah.
So to me, does that make the additions the Eagles made on defense even that more important? Is the fact that Washington could be that much better, you need to be that much better.
Well, yeah, Josh, because I think it's a big picture thing. I think that offensively, and we'll have this conversation down the road too, offensively, I think the Giants have some pretty tough weapons who, if they're on the field, can be matchup problems. Kadarius Toney may be kind of a little, not have his priorities straight, but he is a weapon. And if Saquon Barkley is healthy, he's a weapon. And we've already seen Darius Slayton hurt the Eagles in the past, and we know that if Kenny Golladay is healthy and invested, he's a tough player. So the Giants, to me, are a team. And again, I think with Kafka as their coordinator and Dable as their head coach, and the upgrades that they made on their offensive line, which has been terrible lately, that you can see a scenario where they're a way better offense. And remember, when the Eagles played the Giants last year, not only did they lose the first game, the second game was Jake Fromm starting and was the worst quarterback play I've ever seen up front live in my 16, 17 years covering football. That was god-awful, right? So if Daniel Jones is healthy and in this new system and making use of all his weapons, Toney, Sterling Shepard, Kenny Golladay, Barkley, then that should be a better offense too. So I think it was just in general best for the Eagles to recognize that the NFC East is going to get a little bit better. It's not going to be maybe the total laughing stock that it's been for the last few years. And if you want to win it, you can't just come with subpar talent and expect to win it.
Before I let you go, I want to ask, after listening to Greg Cossell, was there anything about Dallas or Washington that you heard him talk about that made you feel differently about either of those teams coming into this season?
Yeah, I think with Washington, knowing that they love that Ron Rivera is a big run guy and set an RPO guy, and he's not like Pete Carroll where he feels like he has to run all the time, but he likes to establish run. He did with Carolina, even with Cam Newton being MVP, right? Always had the two running backs in the running game. So Greg Cossell really likes Brian Robinson, the rookie running back from was it Oklahoma, right?
Yeah.
Was that where Rob? Yeah.
Oh, Robinson. No, he's from Alabama.
I'm sorry, I meant Alabama. Right. Brian Robinson, he likes a lot. And he even believes that Brian will have an opportunity to overtake Antonio Gibson as the number one running back. But I don't think Antonio Gibson's going to go away. I think that actually gives Rivera the kind of 1-2 punch at that position that he really likes to have. Remember, when Cam Newton won MVP, they had, I want to say, who were the two running backs? They both had really good years. And I can't, my mind is jogged now. Was it like D'Angelo Williams and somebody else back in that year?
I believe that was Jonathan
really
Stewart back then?
John Stewart. Yeah, Jonathan Stewart and D'Angelo Williams, was it? Either way, they had a really good running game that year, which took the pressure, which allowed Cam to be Cam. And, Cam got a lot of downfield looks. And, Washington's got guys who can stretch the field if their running game is going well, and that's Jahan Dotson and Terry McLaurin. So, and Curtis Samuel, if healthy, can also stretch the field. So I do think that there's a potential for them to be a pretty decent team that is certainly going to be much more formidable than the Garrett Gilbert / Taylor Heineke teams that the Eagles got to pounce on last year.
Yes, it was Jonathan Stewart and D'Angelo Williams in Cam's rookie year when the team was number one in the NFL in rushing touchdowns and third in rushing yards that year.
Yeah. Now, they had a really good offensive line, and this Washington line, again, is going to struggle on the interior, but nothing helps a line out than being able to just run and move the ball, moving forward on the ground. So that might help them, and it might help Carson Wentz, who's a much better play-action quarterback than he is just kind of dropping little 5 to 10 yard West Coast type style. Even Doug Peterson's offense for Carson Wentz was way more vertical than pure West Coast.
Yeah, and all Eagle fans remember how many times Wentz would play action. When Wentz was good, he was so good at the play action that the TV tape would lose track of him with the ball. And that's why people like you have to watch the All-22, because there's so many times the TV went with the runner back in 2017, and Wentz still have the ball in his hands, and he's bombing it downfield to Aguilar or Torrey Smith. So we know Wentz definitely can do that.
Sure. We have recency bias as a people too. Like Carson Wentz sort of, he gets released, he gets crapped on by his team.
Right.
He loses against Jacksonville, and it all kind of makes this offseason all about how bad Carson Wentz is. But as Greg Cossell pointed out from tape study, you go back and watch him last year. While he was far from perfect, he was not bad at all. I think it was 27-7 from touchdowns to interceptions. And there were some games I think he went into New England and won there. There were some playoff teams that he beat and games where he played well, and not just because they gave the ball to Jonathan Taylor 30 times. He actually threw the ball well. So again, it's all about the coaching and the support system around him, and whether or not he can come back to earth a little bit with the ego and everything. But there's certainly some ability there for him to do some good things in Washington.
Yeah, Wentz beat Bill Belichick and the Patriots in prime time, too. It wasn't just like a 1 o'clock Sunday afternoon game. So,
right.
It was, listen, Wentz is, I think they said, I saw the stat the other day on Good Morning Football. They said Wentz has now had 4 seasons with 7 or fewer interceptions in a year. You think about how ridiculous that is, but everybody says the guy sucks.
Right. Exactly. That's sort of that recency bias of just the last 2 games and then the whole offseason, let's crap on Carson fest that the Colts were having there. So
he's Geoff Mosher.
They beat the 49ers, by the way. They beat the 49ers 30-18. I'm looking at some of their games. I mean, they beat the Bills 41-15. I don't even remember that.
It was early in the year.
That's interesting.
I think that was
Yeah,
like
no,
week
November
5 or 6 or
21st.
something.
Unless I'm looking at the wrong but I do remember that they beat the 49ers, yeah.
Hey, if Wentz is good and Washington is healthy, that's dangerous. That's for sure. But to learn more about Washington, check out the latest edition of the Inside the Birds podcast. It dropped this morning. Go download, subscribe, give it the 5-star review, the whole 9 yards. He's Geoff Mosher at Geoff Mosher NFL on Twitter, and he'll be back on Wednesday here on 97.3 ESPN. Geoff, great stuff today.
Awesome, Josh. Nice job. Talk to you soon.